did you go when you were in the service?
I went to Korea, but in that trip, you left the United States. You went to Hawaii. At that time, Hawaii was not a part of us. You did what they called a shakedown cruise, which means you tested your guns, your firing. You put up these small drones, like I'm sure all of you have seen the large drones we have today that they use in the military, on TV and that, but we had small ones, and we actually had to go out and do gunnery and knock those out of the sky. The ship, to make sure the ship would run proper, to make sure it would turn proper, make sure that all of the electronics were working good. So you did that for a week in Hawaii. Then you went to the Philippines. You spent another week in the Philippines taking on supplies, food, munitions, etc. Then you went from there to Japan. You left Japan after probably 10 days in Japan because, again, you put on more supplies. There were different supplies that were put on that. You went to Korea. You were in the Yellow Sea. You were in the Pacific Ocean. You were in several other. I'd have to get out the map to show you where they are and what they are, and I will do that in a little bit. But anyway, you went to all these places, and you spent 9 months at sea with the airplanes on there, and what your job was to be sure you supplied them and armed them so that they could go and do their bombing and do their runs and their raids that they had to do. And as I said, it went on 24 hours a day, so you were sitting out there in the middle of the ocean, and sometimes, I think in 9 months, we probably went to port 4 times. So the majority of your time is set right out there in the ocean, doing your thing. We had the guns that we had on our ship wouldn't blow clear to the land, in other words, like you do now. Those guns were strictly to prevent any aircraft from coming in and sinking that floating air base out there. And that's what it was. You were the lifeline for those pilots because they didn't have enough fuel to go from Korea, where they were doing their bombing, back to one of our bases. So you had to have that ship out there where they got their fuel, they got their food, they had their place to rest, and all that kind of stuff. So I went to a lot of places that it's just almost impossible to name all of them, but the majority of your time was spent right out on the water.
Do you recall any particularly humorous or unusual events?
Unusual events?
Northern Lights.
What?
Northern Lights.
Oh yeah, that's a good one. Now most of you know Tom, he's my son. He lived in Alaska, and the Borealis, or the Northern Lights. Have any of you seen that on TV? It's a beautiful shimmering color type thing. That's on that aircraft carrier in the middle of the ocean. We had large antennas for radio, for communication and all. And at night, in the day they were this way. At night they laid those antennas out over the sides of the ship. And it would look like a liquid, that the clouds and doing their thing on that coloring and all. When you were standing out there and looking at it, it actually looked like that was coming down and dripping off of the end of those antennas. It was kind of like a Christmas type thing for you. It was real interesting. It just mesmerized you. You'd stand there and you'd watch it for many, many hours, in fact, as far as that goes.
How did people entertain themselves?
I'm sorry, honey?
How did people entertain themselves?
Well, again, we'll show you the pictures on that, but there's everything. You had a movie that you could go to. You had church. You had chess games. You had basketball. You had boxing. These are the type of things that were intercollegiate there on the ship. When you did go to port, usually the Marine and the Navy always kind of, competed with one another, so to speak. Well, you had boxing matches between the Marines and the Navy. I mean, there was all basketball games between the Marines and the Navy. The ship is very large. It's imagine a football field, how long it is. That ship is 3 times that in length. 3 times that, and it has to have that distance for those planes to come in and land and not go right off the front. So what they have is cables stretched out, and we'll show pictures of that too. They have the cables here, and there's a tail hook, as they call it, coming off the back of the plane that's coming in. And it has to grab that cable, and it stretches it out and stops the airplane. If they miss that cable, then they go right off the front of the ship, and they didn't have enough power to elevate and to take off again. They actually went down, the ships ran over. And it did happen a few times, not a whole lot, but a few times. So later on, what they did, the flight deck, and you'll see it in the pictures, is straight. Later on, what they did was come up where the elevator brings the planes up to this deck to be ready to take off. And they went and put another deck out this way. So that way the airplanes took off, they went this way, and there's no possibility of them getting run over by the ship if something happened to them. But it took them 3 years into the Korean War to decide this was something they had to do. And they did it to save the pilots and make sure that, they were safe. And sometimes they would have to abort a landing. And we have a series of pictures that will show you how they spot the aircraft carrier, how they come around and how they actually land on that aircraft carrier. It's their sequence of pictures that will help you better understand that. We had 2 types of airplanes on there. We had jets, and it was when the jets were first commissioned to go to war. It was in Korea, and they were much smaller than our jets today. We had prop-driven planes called AD-4 Sky Raiders, and those were the 2 sets of planes. The AD-4's wings would fold. When you put them up, they pinned them and they flew like this, but when you put them down in storage, they were like this. We had 99 planes aboard that ship. Today, they only hold 90. The ships are much bigger, but their armament is much better. The planes are much larger, and they can do things that we just didn't have the ability to do. It's been over 60 years ago that I was in the Navy. So that's a lifetime for you, for your mother and father, for your grandfathers, for even some of your great-grandfathers. So it was a long time ago, and the advancement we've made in our military during this period of time, in our weaponry, in our ability to do what we need to do, it's just amazing, and it will continue to grow. And as you grow up and become young adults and join the military service, which I'm sure a lot of you will, you're going to learn things that even today that your fathers, brothers, sisters, and all are not learning because of the advancement.
Do you recall the days your service ended and where were you?
The day I did which, honey? I'm sorry.
Do you recall the day your service ended and where?
My service, when it ended? Yes, the Korean War, or the things that, like Korea, they called it first because it was not a, quote, declared war. They called it police action. They called it a couple of other things, and just a few years ago, they sanctioned it as being an actual war, like World War II or whatever, as far as I go. So what they did then, when they brought you back to the States, your ship went to San Francisco, California. Went to San Diego first, then it went up to San Francisco. I actually was discharged off of the ship in Seattle, Washington on October the 21st, 1955. And we were the first group ever to be discharged directly off the ship, because normally they brought you back to a base and housed you there for 2 or 3 weeks while they were going through all this paperwork and all that kind of stuff. But I didn't have to do that. I actually was discharged directly off the ship in Seattle, Washington, and I had my little trailer hooked onto the back of my Buick, and I headed to California. The minute I got out.
Can you tell us, did you make any close friends in the Navy?
Yes, I did, and it's, you get separated because you're all from different places and all that, but some of them you keep contact with, some you don't. The young fellow that joined the Navy with me, we went to high school together, we got separated. He went on a different carrier than I did. I didn't see him for over 50 years. Did not keep close contact with him whatsoever. And my brother ran into somebody who knew him, gave me his address, and I called him. This has been about maybe 3 years ago. I called him, and we talk monthly now. We didn't for all of those years, but he was one that joined the Navy with me. And I have another friend in Seattle, Washington, who was an artist, and he did a lot of in the book, you'll see these little character cartoon type things and all that. He did a lot of that work, and I was the best man at his wedding. So he still lives in the state of Washington. He's a couple of years older than I am. So we do. Those are the only 2 out of the people that I knew on that ship. Now, I told you there was 3,000 people, but there were people on there that I never met. In 3 years on that ship, a lot of people in there that we just didn't know one another because our area of concern was here and theirs was here and another one was over here. So you got to know the ones in your division, which in my case was probably 22, 23 people is all. You got to know them, but when we got out of the military, everybody just kind of went their own way, went back to their own state, got their jobs, went to work, and did not stay in close contact. So I'm fortunate that now I have two of them that I do contact regularly.
Did you like the Navy?
I had times I liked it and times I didn't like it. In the beginning, when they were so strict that it was one of those things you kind of said to yourself, why did I do this? I did it because the Korean people needed help. And they asked us as the United States of America military to come help them to prevent the communist Chinese from driving them into the sea. And that's exactly what they were doing with them. So it was rewarding, very rewarding when your planes went and made their strikes and you knew that they had saved a lot of people. I mean a lot of people. So that part of it was very rewarding. Some of the countries I got to go to, great. I mean, you weren't in port that long, but the Philippines, Hong Kong, China, Hawaii. I mean, all of these different places. We went to a number of places, didn't spend much time there, but it was really rewarding to be able to go to those countries and see how they lived in comparison to us. And I can say this, I've never visited one country that was better than the United States of America. They didn't have what we have. They didn't have the freedoms that we had. They had to fight for everything that was there. So it was rewarding to go and meet those people and see how they lived, but it was kind of sad too, in the fact that we had all we had and they didn't have. But we'll continue to have what we have as long as we have young people like you who will come forward when they're called and do their duty. And I know that will happen.